Welcome to this Fane online event, a night in with Alex Wheatle and Benjamin Zephaniah. Hello if you're watching on the 11th of December, and welcome also if you're watching in the 7-day on-demand period. My name is Hannah Lavery. I am a poet and a playwright, and today I am delighted and honoured to be hosting this virtual gathering for the wonderful Benjamin Zephaniah and Alex Wheatle. This evening we'll be discussing their new novels. Benjamin's novel is part of the Voices series Windrush Child, and Alex's novel Cane Warriors. We are often told a history in this country which excludes and silences. These novels centre our Black history, Black voices and Black lives in two stories that demand attention and empathy. In my preparation, I tried 3, 4 and more times to condense these incredible biographies of these two amazing writers who have lived so many lives and achieved so much. And I think all the time I have would not be enough to properly introduce them, but I will try my best. So please welcome Alex Wheatle. Alex is an award-winning author, and this is his, I hope, 14th novel. I think I'm right.
That is correct.
Described by Lem Sissay as a prince among men. And if we were in the same room, Alex, I would definitely curtsy to you. Alex was awarded the MBE in Literature in 2008 and is rightly regarded as one of our finest writers. I'm delighted to also welcome you this evening to Benjamin Zephaniah, an inspiration to so many of us, myself included, a groundbreaking and much loved poet and writer, a legend, I would say. To list his works would be some undertaking, but from poetry for children, young adult fiction, music and passionate, necessary, political, searing poetry, Benjamin Zephaniah is a force to be reckoned with and one that we are all grateful for. So welcome, Benjamin. Hello. I hope you're all well.
Wow. I hope I don't let anybody down now.
Well, I was going to start off just by, I suppose what I'm really interested in is why you, what inspired you, I suppose, to write The Cane Warriors, Alex, and The Windrush Child, Benjamin. And I was wondering if you would just tell us a little bit about that journey to writing these novels. And Alex, I thought I could start with you.
For me, Hannah, I've come full circle. I remember at 18 years of age, I was serving time in Wormwood Scrubs after the Brixton uprising of April 1981. And I was presented with The Black Jacobins by the great C.L.R. James. And I had no idea about Caribbean history or any kind of slave revolt growing up. And so to delve into that book and discover the likes of Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines and heroes like that, it blew my mind. And so as I traveled along in my writing career, I always had that narrative in the back of my head. And it came full circle when I was visiting my mother 2 or 3 years ago. And we were sitting down together, and I didn't grow up with her. So when I do visit her, I love to hear tales about Jamaica and how she grew up. And she grew up in a place called Richmond in the parish of St. Mary, near to the north coast. And she was describing particular aspects of her childhood, what she listened to, what she read. And sometimes she said she would hear the name of Tacky mentioned. And I thought, Tacky? Who's this Tacky? And she wasn't quite sure. I mean, I was aware of revolt people like Paul Bogle, Sam Sharp, but Tacky was not so much mentioned in my awareness anyway. So Google is your friend. I Googled him and found out about this incredible human being, Tacky, who led the slave revolt in 1760. He captured, he raided, he liberated 2 plantations at Trinity and Frontier. He marched to Fort Haldane on the St. Mary coast, and he killed everybody there. And I think he stole 40 guns and lots of ammunition. And I said to myself, wow, how comes I haven't come across this? How comes this isn't part of world history? This is 30 odd years before what Toussaint Louverture achieved in Haiti, or in then days it was called San Domingo. And I thought maybe this was, like this inspired those Haitians to take their own revolution after they heard what Tacky had achieved in Jamaica or what he tried to achieve. And that really stuck with me. And I really felt that it deserves a narrative. And as I undertook more research, and when I understood that if you was 11, 12, 13 or 14, you was required to work in a cane field and you was treated with the same cruelness and callousness as any other man. And so I felt it'd be much more compelling if I tell this story from a teenager's perspective. And so it's one of my most proud books, and I'm so honored to write this story, if you like, because for me, I'm writing about ancestors. And for me, it should be part of world history anyway, not just British or black or whatever. It's part of world history. And I feel that I'm a vessel to promote this. And it's very important that our children know about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an incredibly powerful novel. So thank you so much for writing it. And I think for me, you know, moving to you, Benjamin, about the Windrush, it feels like it's on the same line of ancestors and, well, of course it is on ancestors generation for this story. And I'm interested again, as I was asking Alex, about what inspired you and what led you to write this novel.
Well, again, I want to, like Alex, go back in history a little bit. When I was growing up, I didn't really know much about history. My family's from Jamaica and Barbados. And I didn't really do very well at school. And I remember kind of not liking history, hating it, because it just didn't seem relevant to me. And every time black people were mentioned, it was about somebody liberating us or somebody discovering us or something like that. I too went to prison, and it's really interesting because I know Alex's story, and as soon as I heard a particular part of his story, I thought that was me, because I was a Rasta man in prison trying to raise the consciousness of everybody else, telling them to read Marcus Garvey, telling them to read C.L.R. James. So, you know, I was really lucky. I then came out of prison, went to London and became friends with C.L.R. James and other people who were kind of political heroes of mine. The interesting thing was, although I thought that I wasn't interested in history, as soon as I started to learn about what we now call Black history, I just got fascinated by it, by the things we've achieved. And it's not all good. I don't like when people say, you know, the glorious kings and queens of Africa. I mean, some of them are really brutal, you know, some of them were, even in Jamaica, the Maroons who feature in my book, you know, sometimes they did really revolutionary things. Sometimes they worked with the government. You know, when it comes to Tacky, for example, they weren't really on good terms, the Maroons with Tacky's revolutionaries, if you like. Obviously I knew about my mum's journey here. And so when it came to writing this book, I felt I wanted to do something about the Windrush generation. It was historic, but it wasn't just historic because the people of the Windrush generation are alive now, or many of them. And so for the first time, actually, when I'm working on a novel, I could actually talk to my mum, and my mum would tell me stuff. I mean, there's a few things that she corrected me on in the first draft of that book, which I just took for granted. You know, for example, I shouldn't tell people this, but, you know, I was writing it and I was talking about Jamaicans watching television and seeing images of England. My mother said she came here in 1956 and she'd never seen a television in her life. You know, so I said, didn't have television in Jamaica? She said, no, not at all. You know, so it was all radio or pictures, you know, photographs and images and stuff like that. Little things like that, my mum fine-tuned me on, you know. But actually, just like Alex, I wanted to tell the story from a young boy's point of view. It's been an obsession of mine anyway. You know, if you look at my past novels, Refugee Boy, I was hearing about refugees in the news, but I wanted to tell it from a boy's point of view. And gangsterism in hip hop, I wanted to tell it from a teenager's point of view. You know, I'm just obsessed with, I know what it was like for me as a teenager So I'm obsessed with kind of trying to see it from a teenager's point of view, because I think we very much misunderstood teenagers and children generally. You know, we live in a world now where you cannot say in the public domain, in the public area, that you don't like women, or you don't like black, or you don't like white, or you don't like gays. But people can say, I don't like children, and people laugh, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think that children and young adults are the minds that we really need to inspire, because they're still in touch with their childhood, but they are looking forward. And those are the minds we really need to light up. And so that's why I'm obsessed with teenage fiction.
And it's interesting, because I had a question a bit later, but I'll ask it now, which was about, you've both chosen to tell these stories through the eyes of children or young adults. And I was just really interested, as a writer, what kinds of, you know, we always think about all the how that might restrict you as a writer, but my sense from reading your work is actually it gives you a kind of huge amount of freedom. So I was just, or allows, so I was just interested about that, about writing from that point of view, and how that supports or inspires or allows you a certain access into these historical, or Benjamin, maybe not far off in his past in the history, but into these worlds. So I don't know, I mean, should I put that to Alex first and then come to Benjamin?
I think most adults, they tend to forget about how traumatic, how awkward those teenage years are. But I guess because my own childhood and teenage years was so full of stress and so traumatic, it stayed with me for a long time. So I think I can engage and relate. And I'm sure that Benjamin has that same kind of trauma as well. And it stays with you. So you want to relate, you want to engage, and you have this empathy. I have this huge empathy for what teenagers are going through. I mean, it really tears me apart that they cannot live the lives they want to live. I teach at university, and it kills me that they cannot interact. They cannot see me one-on-one like they normally do. And so I just have this engagement with their mindset. And I think that's very healthy as a writer to have. And, you know, I'm just trying to address, in many cases, my own issues of going through my teenage life and how awkward it was for me, how difficult it was for me to make that adjustment from a child to a young man, if you like. And so Moa has that, even though he lives in a desperate situation, he's still trying to make that adjustment into manhood. And I think that's what I try to capture.
Yeah, and you absolutely do, in that sense of brotherhood, about responsibility, about becoming who he is so strong and really drives the narrative. And I mean, he's an absolutely compelling character. And I think the same with Leonard, this idea with Leonard and the Windrush Child, where he is, something about his sort of, and Benjamin, I'll let you speak rather than talk for you, but that idea about Leonard, how did you know, what was it like writing through his eyes? How did that?
Well, my mother was walking down the street in Jamaica with her sister, and she saw a poster on the street that says, "Come to the mother country, the streets are paved with gold," and all that stuff. She said to her sister, "Do you fancy going?" And her sister, my auntie, said, "No, it's too damn cold. Me not go there." Me not go there. And my mum went, "Me give it a try." She went to her uncle. Her uncle kind of raised her. And not that they were separated, it's just that in St. Elizabeth, where you lived, you may have been born from your mother, but the village raised you, kind of thing. And so he gave her £70 and she came on this ship. Apart from that, that's the only difference between me and the Windrush generation. I am the Windrush generation. It just happened because of that decision my mother made that I was born here, you know? So now, jump forward to me as a writer. All my teenage fiction has been contemporary. I've always been writing about what's happening now. So when I started to think about writing this book, I think just around the same time, I actually got through the post, somebody sent me, I can't remember who, uncorrected proof of Cain Warriors, right? right? So I read it, and I've never done historical fiction before. So I read it, and I thought, well, if Alex can do it, I can do it, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But no, seriously, I looked at it and I thought, that's really interesting, you know. I've got another friend, it's going to sound like I'm name dropping now, but who does brilliant historical fiction, Philippa Gregory. And I know that she spends a lot of time, I mean, she was a historian, she spends a lot of time looking at the detail of history and then writing. The research, she's told me this personally, the research can take her much longer than the writing sometimes. Whereas I've always been the opposite. Because I've always written contemporary fiction. Sorry, there's a few strands to this. The other strand is me as a 14-year-old boy, dyslexic, no books in my house, right? When I saw a book, because I was dyslexic, I just saw it as hard work. Although I love telling stories. And so there was no one around me to inspire me. And I kind of hated books because I saw it as work and I saw it as stuff that my teacher gave me to punish me, right? Then I became a writer, a poet first. And when I started doing poetry, it was all in my head. So I didn't need to write it down. So what do I do? And again, like Alex, I teach in the university. And this may sound a little bit contradictory, but what do I do when I come to writing my novels? I don't do research. I look at myself, I research myself, I say, what would the 14-year-old Benjamin Zephaniah like to have read? Yeah, and that's why my first novel is about joyriding and stuff like that, and facial identity. The second novel is about refugees. The third one is about hip hop. The fourth one is about kids and their relationship with teachers. You know, it's like, I think, what would I have liked to have read when I was 14? So the research is kind of easy. I may do some details later, but for research, I just go to myself. So when it came to this one, I really had to do research. I mean, on the day that Leonard lands, I looked at what the weather was like. I mean, everything. Yeah, it's really hard work. But I kept telling myself, if Alice can do it, I can do it.
Yeah, of course.
No, but I just felt it was a really important story to tell. Like I said, I wanted to tell it from a children's point of view. And I also wanted it to be, and I don't know if Alex does this too, I want to know that young people can engage with it, but older people will learn something from it too.
Absolutely.
Well, even in the research, I learned from it. I mean, reading Benjamin's book, it reminded me of sitting with my father and him telling me about his journey. And I think his ship stopped off in Genoa and other places before it came to, I think it was Southampton. And it really resonated with me because obviously I didn't grow up with my father. And so reading Windrush Child, and I've got it here, it brought me back to that lovely time I spent with my father. Yeah. And him telling me about his journey, the bad food on the ship. I think I think for most days he had spaghetti bolognese. It kind of made me a bit teary because it produced triggers in me, triggers that I thought I never had. You know, remembering, because my father passed away in 2011. Right. My mother, she came over by plane in 1961, so her journey was different. But my father's journey, Benjamin's book just took me back to that, me sitting on his porch in Old Harbour, Jamaica, and him just spending an afternoon. He was drinking Dragon Stout and I was drinking rum and coke. And he was telling me about his journey to the UK. And he said he didn't get on with the Barbadians and all the small island, because they were first on the ship. And he obviously got on at Jamaica. And that just fired my imagination because I didn't grow up in that culture. I didn't know these stories. And it's very timely. Benjamin's book is so timely in this day and age, especially as I just read the other day, Benjamin, I'm not sure if you're aware that so many Windrush generation, they still haven't received compensation yet. It's appalling.
Yeah. My theory is that the government keep holding out and just I mean, it's beginning to happen. Some of them are dying literally of old age and of heartbreak and stuff like that. And if they hold out long enough, they know they'll get away with it. There'll be no one else to pay. But yeah, I got to tell you, I mean, we have to. I always, first of all, we know that the story of the Black presence in Britain goes much longer than the Windrush story. It goes back to Roman times. There are some ancient Egyptians, people that study that say that actually some Egyptians arrived here centuries ago and just turned back because it was so cold and desolate. But, you know, 1 year before the Empire Windrush arrived, there was a ship called the Alamazura, which also had Caribbean people in it. A lot of ex-military people who wanted to come back. There were ships before the Windrush, and obviously a lot of ships afterwards. The Windrush is kind of in our imagination because of the television images. You know, that was the one where the television cameras were there, And, you know, they never call themselves the Windrush Generation. My mother never called herself the Windrush Generation through the 70s and the 80s. And I remember in the 90s, we started to doing events for Windrush. And my mother had to ask me about Windrush, you know. So they never saw themselves, they never called themselves the Windrush Generation. It's our generation looking back and kind of shining a spotlight on the Windrush because we have photographic and film evidence and just generalizing and saying, you know, just giving them this name. But we have to be careful because there's lots of stories of people that weren't on the Windrush that are still suffering, you know, and people that came before the Windrush.
And I think it's that importance for me about both of these novels, the importance of bringing centre stage the history of Black and brown people in the world, but particularly within the British kind of context, and the fact that so many people growing up, it's not part of our curriculums, it's not part of the history that we know, and for a lot of it feels like it's very much something that sits in the footnotes. And so to have two novels which put those narratives so center stage, that give these characters such agency, is so powerful. And one of my favorite moments, Benjamin, from the Windrush Child, and my favorite character was Brother Brooke, when he tells Leonard about his Maroon history. I hope I pronounced that right. Maroon history, and then how that history and that knowing of that history throughout his life and through his journey through the book is such an important sort of anchor, an important sense of self and strength. And I suppose I just kind of want you to tell me more about that. Tell me what it was for Leonard to have that knowledge, but maybe also what it was for you and what that means for you, those stories. And I'm particularly fascinated with Nanny Maroon as well. So I don't know if you want to kind of talk a little bit about that.
Well,
I know that's 3 questions, but
yeah, and it's funny because the first thing I want to say is that Brother Book is based on a real character whose name was Brother Book, but actually he was in Trinidad. I went and did a tour in Trinidad once, and after the tour I decided to stay, and there was a brother called Brother Book who lived up in the hills, and I just moved him to Jamaica. So I can imagine some people from Trinidad going, yeah, we know that, man. But I forgot the gist of the question now. The Maroons, yeah. Actually, again, Alex kind of alluded to it. This thing about kind of sitting on the veranda or sitting with your elders in the Caribbean and talking is something that happens a lot. I did it with my grandmother. My grandmother comes from a place not far from Maroon Town, where my novel is set. Well, my novel starts. It's called St. Elizabeth. And, you know, I used to sit there for hours and hours talking with her. And so it made sense for me to make Brother Book this character who kind of knew this history, that would sit down with Leonard and talk to him about where they've come from. Because the Maroons, they were like a warrior caste, if you like, you know, and they just kept fighting the British. Sometimes they did deals with them. Some of the deals were good, some of them were bad. But they were always fiercely independent. That was their main thing. They had territory, free territory in Jamaica. Well, they've always basically, as soon as their first battles, they gained free territory in Jamaica. And Nanny was, I'm sorry, I can't give you the full details. I'm not very good with the years, but Nanny was this female, obviously, leader of the Maroons. And she's one of these characters that has kind of grown almost mythical, because some people say that she kind of, you know, they pointed a gun at her and shot her and she just disappeared and kind of, you know, just literally just disappeared and kind of materialized somewhere else and stuff like this. There's amazing stories about her, the power she had and stuff like this. And I think to this day, she's on Jamaican, one of the Jamaican banknotes, because she's seen as a real hero. So again, sorry, I can't remember all the dates. Basically, you think of them like a warrior caste in Jamaica that have never really submitted. And one of the things I wanted to do with, and I knew this from the start, that I wanted to do with the Maroon aspect of Leonard's being history, is see what happens when it's transplanted here in Britain. Because I know in the 80s, I don't know if this is true now, in the late 80s, early 90s, that something like 90% of Asian shopkeepers had PhDs. I mean, sometimes you meet some refugees and immigrants and their qualifications are so high. And then they come to Britain and they're emptying dustbins or something. And I mean, I respect everybody that empties dustbins, but, you know, and that fascinated me. So to have all this proud warrior family come to Manchester, just live in a tenement house, you know, and I just love that, not love, but I'm just interested in that juxtaposition, taking, you know, sometimes you get these Nigerian kings and queens that just live in a kind of yard in Birmingham. I just wanted to kind of show people that this is what happens sometimes when people come here. You may call them immigrants, you may call them refugees, but sometimes you don't know their history, and their history may be a lot broader, bigger, prouder than you think it is. It's not one of always running.
And you have that beautiful, you have that beautiful moment in the book where he says, where I won't spoil it for the readers, but Leonard is a grown man, and he talks about, I may be here now, but my story is long, my story is deep, my story, and my story is as deep as the roots of the tree. And it was so powerful, because I think, you know, as somebody with, you know, as of color with a mixed background as well, that idea that our history only just began this year, like we don't have that somehow that not having that kind of vast, or not having reading history where you have agency, or where you're powerful, or where you have your heroes and that stuff, and just to come to you, Alex, and Cane Wars, that thing about in the bloods, that's all the way, that refrain all the way through it, that's so powerful and beautiful, and your story was based upon the true story. It takes it to the heart of the true story of the 1760 Easter uprising, and
that's correct,
and this figure of Tacky. And you talked a little bit about Tacky earlier, but could you tell us a little bit more about what it was for you when you discovered him?
It's hard to pin down, actually, because hard facts are hard to come by, especially his pre-story before he came to Jamaica. I mean, there's lots of places, lots of archival stuff there that suggests that he was a prince from Ghana, and he actually almost was involved with the slave trade in some way or form. But apparently there was some kind of bad deal, and he found himself being shipped to Jamaica, but he had apparently this princely, regal kind of presence, and he took that to Jamaica, and he could speak languages and so on. And because he was so well thought of by his masters, that he was given a job near the master's house, or around about the master's house. He didn't have to go to the cane field, and so there he can instruct his fellow slaves about this, this insurrection. And so he was a very powerful figure. He had this regal kind of presence about him. And obviously he was followed. And I cannot think of anyone prior to Tacky who actually tried to achieve what he tried to achieve. But saying that, I still wanted to tell this story through the eyes of a 14-year-old boy. I thought it would be much more compelling rather than just do the hero narrative. I wanted to know what would I feel like if somebody tapped me on my shoulder one night and said, "Okay, you got to kill Master now, in the next few days." I mean, I don't know how I would react. So I just wanted to maybe not write about the heroes so much, but the ordinary guy in the cane field. How does he deal with this? How someone once said to me, "Alex, it's not kings and queens who starts a revolution. It's the ordinary guy in the field who gets pissed off about something." And I think there's a certain truth to that. Until you convince those guys in the field that things are wrong and things need to change, things always stay the same. You have to convince the Moras, the Kevertons of this world, to take up arms, and so something can change.
I mean, he's an absolutely incredibly inspiring. I mean, I found Moa just his journey and the way in which he survives, and his strength and his moral code through the whole thing, the struggle with the violence and I mean, and that's the kind of thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about next. I mean, Cane Warriors is a story of enslaved people, and it's the brutality and the violence of their lives and the fury of the uprising is one that you rightly don't shy away from. But this must have been really hard for you to write. I mean,
absolutely,
you had to go to really dark and hard places, and I want you just to ask me. I want to ask really why, and I kind of instinctively know this, but I think it's still good to ask, which is why you thought it was so important to write about that reality in such a visceral way.
Well, I had to give an honest representation of what their lives entailed. And also, I was really pissed off about previous books about how Wilberforce and his crew went to the House of Parliament and got slavery abolished, and they taking all the credit. That really upset me reading, I think it was William Hague's book about Wilberforce, and he was the instigator. He should be lauded forever and ever. Oh no, because people forget that the slave masters were given something like £20 million. And in the 1833, that's an astronomical figure. I mean, now that'd probably be worth billions and billions. So in the House of Parliament, where it's filled with rich people who own lands and so on in the 17th century, obviously they're going to take that money and run. And also, they were motivated to do that because it wasn't just Tacky. There were slave revolts here, there, everywhere on almost a weekly basis going on in Jamaica and in Haiti at the same time. And so they found it desperately hard to control. They really did. And so something had to give. At one stage, actually, the British actually sent for Mosquito Indians to try and quell the Maroons in Cockpit country, I think it was. And so they were desperately trying to, try and stamp it out, this revolt kind of a character that many Jamaicans had. And you have to remember that some of them, as Benjamin says, they came from warrior class, like Ashanti. I cannot remember the other ones, but I know one was Ashanti, one was Coromantee, and so forth. From the Akan district of Ghana, most Jamaicans come from, and they were warrior class. They would never give in, never. And so I felt I had to honor that, and I felt I had to represent that in this book. I think it was Chinua Achebe who said that the tale of the hunt is always told by the guy with a gun rather than the lion's point of view. And so I'm trying to give our point of view, our ancestors' point of view. They've been silenced for too long. And I feel this is all part of 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement. Yes, it's we've seen statues tossed into bays and so on. But now we need to see our stories. We need to see our perspective, and not just us to see it, but the whole world to see it, because we are part of world history.
No, I think we have a really deep, serious problem in that why was I not going to school, playing truant, hating history, but then going to Saturday school to learn about Black history? I mean, why? I know there are lots of kids now that was like the way I was. I know that I have been beaten up by police in the country of my birth, Britain. And I'm pretty sure that every police officer that beat me does not know my history. There's a Black Lives Matter movement now that's been given some momentum because of the George Floyd murder and other things. And we are beginning to know more and more about our history. And to be honest, when I started to learn more about Black history, I got to the point where I thought, actually, I want to also learn more about white history, because I realized that white history is not just about the kings and the queens and who slept with who and which baby ruled over who and all that kind of stuff. I just did a small television program about, or I can't remember his name now, but I live in the area of Wilberforce. He just comes from up the road from here, but not very far away. There was another guy, white guy, very privileged guy, and he tried to push Wilberforce, and his thing was, hey, look, we don't have to enslave these people. We could do trade with them. We could work with them. We are brothers. We can work. He literally had a suitcase and he was going around to powerful people saying, look at this stuff. It comes from Africa. We could get this. We could do deals. I've got friends. I've got contacts there. He wasn't really listened to. But, and I consider him almost like part of Black history. My point is that it's about the history of all of us. Black history is not just good for Black people. Mm-hmm. Actually, white people desperately need it, probably more than us. Yes. We can get a lot of this stuff from our relatives. White people need it more than us. White police need it more than us. And here lies the big problem. And this is a really serious problem. And I think this is why we're going to get very little movement on this in the near future. And I don't want to get too political, but I got to say it's people like Boris Johnson who have said, no way are we going to touch the history books. As long as the establishment's heroes are the relatives or the very people that enslaved us, and the British establishment, today's British establishment, are interested in protecting them, we'll get nowhere. The history books have to be changed. Yeah. And sometimes statues have to come down. Sometimes they can stay up, but they must be put in context. People can say whatever they want about Winston Churchill and what the great leader. Adolf Hitler, and this is not to make a comparison between both of them, but Adolf Hitler killed so many Jews over 7 years or something. Look what Winston Churchill done in Bengal, how many millions of people he killed in 12 months. But most British people don't know that. I mean, there's the Amritsar massacre, the kind of way they quelled some of the rebellions in Jamaica and Trinidad. What happened in Kenya with the Mau Mau. Yeah. I mean, there's a war crimes. And so, we and David Osogo and all these people can make television programs and all this stuff, but the history books, if the history books are not changed and the true story is not told, then we're always going to have to be on the outside trying to give an alternative narrative. The truth is not alternative.
Yeah, I totally agree. 100%. And it's not even political. It's just speaking truth. And Boris Johnson, he's been criticised for many things about his Piccadilly jibe and so on. But for me, the worst thing he's actually said was when he referred to Africa is that it would have been better if they were sitting in charge. I'm really offended by that. And he should be pulled up about it. And this is why I cannot understand why any African politician who in the government can serve under him. I cannot understand that after he said those comments. Is deeply offensive.
And the thing is about what you're doing with your work, which is really important, is what you're doing is you are insisting that we see these characters as complex characters with agency and with power and with vulnerabilities and pain. And it's about, I think it's very easy to dismiss to dismiss Black and Brown history when we dismiss the people within that history as being less than human, or not giving them the same amount of dignity. And I think what you do so powerfully in these two novels, and actually in all your work, is that you give dignity to that experience. And I think for me, that feels the thing that artists and writers and storytellers do. It's about that empathy and that dignity and that witness. And I'm putting these characters with such agency, with such power, and this idea that there's people within our histories that fought and didn't give up, that were instigators of change rather than being victims. That they were, and I just think that's incredibly powerful. And I think and as you said, I think that's powerful for Black and white and brown, and for all of us to know what makes us who,
Hannah, if you look around the world, you go to, I think it's Sterling, where they might correct me if I'm wrong, they've got a statue of William Wallace. Is that correct?
Yep.
I mean, it's the stand of the 300 Spartans. Everyone knows about that as a world history event. And that story has been told time and time and time again. Everywhere you look, every country honors their heroes, honors their ancestors. And I really think that the Caribbean needs to take control of that and, claim that narrative and start to honor and start speak of Tacky in the same terms as anybody else out there. The Spartan 300, Robert the Bruce, anybody, they're on that level in my mind. And so we need to start presenting it that way.
And I think that Tacky, what I sort of thought was really struck me after I read it as well, was just and I was thinking particularly actually about the way Scots talk about their history and the kind of the battlefield nous of the planning and the strategic kind of, and there's so much in the novel just about strategy and about planning and about the kind of just the genius of that uprising, which I just thought was just within all the fury of it and the fury of that moment, there was the genius of it, which I reflected upon afterwards about how clever that was to have in that, and actually to have the child witness that, to have that character of Maya witness that. It was wonderful. And I just wanted to ask, actually, when we were talking about the kind of this violence or this visceral talking, writing. I mean, Benjamin, in the Windrush, you don't shy away from the reality of growing up in Manchester for Leonard and the racism of the colour bar, the experiences of school, but the really shocking, out of the blue racial violence, the trauma of that. And I'm asked the same question to Alex. I mean, that must have been difficult to write. But important to, and why was it, I suppose, important for you to include that in the novel?
Well, there's so many things that Leonard goes through in Manchester, which are things that I've been through. So this may sound a bit kind of glib, but it wasn't that difficult to write because I've been talking about it for years. My first racist attack was a brick in the back of my head when I was 8 years old. And then I've had lots of physical attacks after that. So I've been talking about them all the time. So it was just about bringing some of those stories together. There's a story in the book where Leonard's waiting with his mum in the shop and he's there next to be served, and the woman comes in and says, "You're not going to serve these darkies before me, are you, Hilda?" And Hilda says, "No, of course not, love," and serves the white woman first. That happened to me and my mother. And I said to my mother, I was only 8 or 9 at the time, I said, "Mum, we were before her." And my mother this is my mother, she's like this, she's like, "Oh, don't worry, son, she's in a hurry and it's her country, you know. But I remember it so well. So there's things like that which would seem kind of difficult to write, but because I've been telling these stories a lot, it wasn't so difficult. Sometimes I have found myself recently, this has happened a few times, and I think maybe this is because I'm getting old. A long time ago, when we were allowed to gather together at literary festivals and things like this, I used to be telling these stories and I would burst into tears. In fact, what happened to me a couple of years ago now, my appendix burst very suddenly while I was in university talking to some students. And I didn't realize at the time. I went to bed because I had to do a public lecture the next day. And I tried to kind of live it out. I didn't realize I could get killed within an hour. I survived 7 hours. The doctors said, it's amazing. How did you do that? I got taken to hospital. The doctor comes up to me. It's this girl, I think she's from Somalia or somewhere like that. And she goes, hey, bro, I've read all your novels, bro. I'm going to save you. And I'm going, is the doctor around? She goes, I'm the doctor, bro. We're going to do it, man. They say as you get older, the police look younger. And I'm like, doctors are really young, you know? And anyway, she saves me and I'm there. And it was just before International Women's Day. And I was doing a lecture at the Women's Gallery in London. And because I knew I was going to talk about my mother and the Windrush generation, although this had nothing to do in my book, like I said, this was a few years ago, I had the photograph of my mother. My plan was to put it on stage and do the talk. I came out of hospital. I was still not quite well, and a nurse said she will follow me to the venue just to make sure I'm okay. So she stood at the side of the stage. I put my mother's photograph down, and I started to talk about my mother coming from Jamaica, working for the NHS, and how proud she was to work for the NHS. And I just got sick and nobody asked me for a credit card. And all these people just looked after me. And I just burst into tears. And there were like 300 women there and I'm just crying and I'm crying and I'm crying. And some women shouted from the back, don't worry, Benjamin, we cry all the time, just carry on. And then not long after that, I was talking about fathers and their relationship with their sons. And, you know, I didn't really have a good relationship with my father. And again, I burst into tears on stage. So sometimes when I'm retelling these stories, I get really emotional. When I'm writing them, not so much, actually. I'm just a bit more practical. How am I going to tell it the way that I hear it, the way that I see it?
It's incredibly poignant as well. And I think for me, it wasn't just, I mean, obviously the violence was so shocking and difficult to read, but it was just the isolation of Leonard. There was 2 points I remember in the point in the book where he said that everybody on the street got on with each other, but no one spoke to us. And Leonard had no one to play with. And the one about being in the park and just playing football on his own and wanting to play with another group. And I won't ruin it, but just the idea of this isolated, lonely child, it really it was powerful in that vulnerability.
If I can break in there, Hannah, that was a part that really got to me, that spoke to my childhood. And, you know, a tear was close to my eyes when I read those passages because I could totally engage and relate to that.
Well, it's the worst place to be alone is in a crowd, you know, and like I always say that my favourite sound to this day, my favourite sound is that sound you get when you're walking past a primary school or something and all the kids are just playing. You know, give me the ball, can I have the rope? Yeah, there's just pure joy and the pursuit of happiness. You know, that's all it is, right? It's a wonderful sound, but if you're in that playground and nobody will talk to you, it's hell. Yeah. If you are the kid in the corner of the playground, that was me. And I used to talk to cats. That's what I do, because nobody would talk to me. I would talk to cats. And it's a lonely, lonely place. Anyway, I think I've said it.
It's one of those things that I remember Benjamin probably remembers, say like an album, The Right Time by the Mighty Diamonds. I'd never heard of Marcus Garvey before. Yeah. Never heard of that before. Yeah. And I gathered strength from lyrics like that or stories like that. I gather strength. It makes me want to get up the next morning and face the world when I was very, very down and very, very low. And so that, when Leonard goes through those days, I just wish that, what we do as artists, we could offer him that strength to get up again and face the day,
I actually wrote a piece in The Guardian a couple of months ago, and it was on that very same subject, how reggae music educated me. A lot of people think reggae was a fad and this, that, and the other, but, the Mighty Diamonds, Pablo Moses, Burning Spear, I mean, all these lyrics had history. Do you remember the days of slavery?
Yeah.
I remember hearing Christopher Columbus was a damn blast. I said, Christopher Columbus is a liar? In school, they were telling me he was a hero. There's a reggae singer in Jamaica telling me he's a liar. I then looked it up and I realized he was telling lies.
Yeah.
We have to do that through our music and our art and our poetry and our culture, because we can't leave it to the politicians and historians who are connected to those in power.
Absolutely. And I think, Alex, I think you're absolutely right. It's that feeling of a collective experience, about coming together. And, there's so many people in this country that grew up as a person of color or alone, whether they're the only person within their school or one of the three. And a lot of the times I think people like Leonard take that on as being a personality flaw rather than it's part of a system. And I think there's something really strong about when Leonard talks about that. And I think that vulnerability of Leonard is so engaging and really powerful, actually, really powerful and important. So we're coming to our end of our session, but I have really one last sort of question. In The Windrush Child, Leonard's mother tells a reporter that she has come to rebuild the mother country. And what struck me about reading both of these novels was the longing for and the love for the beauty and the abundance and the offer of Jamaica. And that in some ways that she is the Mother Earth. To me, she is the real mum country in both of these books. And I just really wanted to know about your relationship with Jamaica and how, in fact, I feel that Jamaica is a character in both of these novels. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I don't know, Benjamin, I'll ask you first.
Well, okay. Before I answer that, I'm just going to say that the name I was trying to remember just a moment ago was Thomas Clarkson. It's been bugging me for the last 20 minutes, Thomas Clarkson. Anyway, now when I was a kid, I used to hear lots of stories about Jamaica. I remember once my mother told me that I had an uncle coming from Jamaica. And because I lived in Handsworth, which was there was a time when Brixton was really Jamaican, and I mean, not simply multicultural, but very Jamaican. Handsworth was like that. And when my mother told me that I was only a small kid, that my uncle was coming from Jamaica, I went to Handsworth Park and I stood on the hill and expected my uncle to come over the horizon because I thought Jamaica was just over there. I was only small, but I just thought, it was an outpost of Handsworth because everything was Jamaican. Everybody talked Jamaican and spoke Jamaican. Then I started to kind of get a black consciousness. Angela Davis and Malcolm X were my heroes. I'm talking about before the hip hop generation kind of claimed them. And so then I started to think about Africa. And I can remember when I met my first African person, I think it was Nigerian. I went home and I went, Mom, I met a real African, And my mother, she's got that colonial mentality. She's kind of embarrassed by Africa. But I was so happy I met an African. Then I wanted to kind of explore my Jamaican history more. And I did so. But Rastafarianism was telling us Africa was the place, not Jamaica. We shouldn't give up an island for a continent. That was our saying. But I had to go to Jamaica to see my immediate family. I get to Jamaica, and one of the first things that happened to me is I'm walking down the road and somebody comes up running alongside me. What's the problem? Are the police after you? And I said, what are you saying that for? He said, why are you walking so fast? And then I said, oh, you're English, man. Because people in Jamaica, they're relaxed and they're slow. And when they see you walking fast, they think, oh, that's an English thing, right? Because if you're in Jamaica and you want to walk fast all the time, you burn out, you burn out. So anyway, my point is, when I went to Jamaica, I realized how English I am. I'm sitting there, I wake up in the morning and I think, where's my muesli?
Yeah.
Everybody's doing saltfish and ackee. I go, where's my muesli? You realise how English you are, and just their attitude. I'm not saying they're wrong or right, but just their attitude sometimes are difficult for us to deal with, you know. When I came back to England, they're telling me that I'm not English. When I went to Africa, and I remember being in South Africa and saying to people in South Africa, this is the homeland. And they go, no, we want to go to Jamaica. What's going on here? You know what I mean? Like, everybody's promised land is somewhere else, you know? And that's what made me an internationalist. Now it's all about where I am. I care about people all over the world. But Jamaica is important because it is where my mother came from. Mm. It's a culture that comes from a small place, but look at the way the Jamaican culture has spread in terms of music and fashion and dance. I mean, it's really disproportionate. I remember an old Pakistani lady saying to me, she literally got a book and said, can you show me where Jamaica is? And when I pointed to Jamaica, she went, I thought it was going to be like a massive place, like America or something. You know, she said, this little place here, this is where all the music comes from, all the food, all the dancing and everything. I said, yeah, this little place here. So it is an amazing place. And it's just, I think one of the greatest things that Black people generally have done, and Jamaicans especially have done, is very simple: survive. I mean, because if you think of everything we've had thrown at us, we should be extinct.
Yeah.
The Arawaks who were in Jamaica before the Africans are extinct.
Yeah. Sadly,
we survived what they threw at the Arawaks and everything else, and we are still here. I refer to Bob Marley again. We are the survivors, the Black survivors.
Yeah, we certainly are. Yeah. I traced my father to Jamaica in Old Harbour. I wrote to the Daily Gleaner. This is about 1985, 1986. And also I wrote to the Jamaican Broadcasting Corporation. And he was sitting in an Old Harbour bar, and he listened to the radio on a Sunday afternoon where they tried to reconnect families. And he heard my name come on the radio, and he choked on his Dragon Stout. That was his drink, Dragon Stout. And so he invited me out there. So I went out there 87 over the Christmas and New Year period. And what struck me when I got off the plane, Benjamin and Hannah, was this heat.
Yes.
This heat, it just hits you. Yeah. And it seems like a different kind of heat.
Yes.
And then when you take the airport road and you see, it reminded me of that James Bond film, Dr. No, when Sean Connery is towed by some assassin or whatever, and there's a sea on both sides, and there's that cement factory, isn't there, as you go into near Kingston.
Oh yeah.
But my head was out the window, Benjamin. I was just looking at the scenery. It just blew my mind away. It's so green and fresh and lush. That's what really took me. That's what stayed with me ever since. And I remember I had an argument with my uncle because he wanted to take me to my father's place in Old Harbour. But the very next day, because I was a reggae head, I wanted to go to Channel 1 studio. I wanted to see if I could maybe spot Sly Dunbar, Robbie Shakespeare, or any of these incredible musicians. Tommy McCook was a favourite of mine. All these fantastic, because they used to produce albums that was what they called revolutionaries.
Yes.
And I was very much into dub and so on at the time. But I really wanted to spot them and see if I could spot anybody and maybe not take a selfie, but at least try and saddle up and say, yes, exactly. I wanted to touch them. You remember in that film Ruckus,
yes,
when the guy does this skank in the record store? I wanted to do that. So it's incredible, really, because I was meant to see my father for the first time. It was, I was reuniting with him. But I did go to see my father first, but I was lucky enough to go to Channel 1 studio. He also took me to St. Mary as well. He took me to Noel Cower's house, and he took me to Port Royal.
Yes.
And then 2 days before I left, he took me to 9 Mile, which I'm very grateful for him for, because he was into Jim Reeves.
Right, yeah.
He loved Jim Reeves, which really surprised me.
Jamaicans like country and western.
Yeah, Benjamin, I could not understand it. There's me, a reggae head, you know, thinking I'm going to the land of reggae.
Yeah.
And all my father's generation are playing Jim Reeves. I thought, what?
There's a brilliant interview with Bob Marley, and somebody says to him, who are you listening to at the moment? And he says, Dolly Parton, right? And they think that Bob Marley's lying or he's fobbing them off. And he comes back and he's on British radio and he says, oh, Bob Marley didn't answer my question when he said he was listening to Dolly Parton. And Bob Marley actually got that journalist and said, why do you think, because I come from Jamaica, I can't listen to country and western? I think one of the reasons why country and western was very popular in Jamaica is because it's got that storytelling aspect to it, you know. You'll hear them say, you know, I was born in Mississippi, and then 3 minutes later I died in, you know, it's like they gone through their whole life kind of thing. You know, one of my favorites was, and I don't know the name of the singer, it was like, all my exes live in Texas. I live in Tennessee. You know what I mean? And it's the kind of thing a reggae artist would do, but in a completely different style. You know what I mean? All my exes live in Texas. That's why I live in Tennessee. You know, just like.
That's wonderful. Okay, well, I was going to ask one last question, and I think it kind of sums up, I think, a lot of what we've been talking about. But really, I suppose I kind of want to know, what's your hope for this book as it goes out into the world? What's your hope for it, and what's your hope, or what do you want your readers to take away from it or be left with when they read these books? Alex, I'll ask you first.
I really hope that this opens doors, and Benjamin's book too, Windrush Child, it opens doors not just for a black reader, but for any reader to engage in our history, because I think through reading you can gain empathy. And but as Benjamin says, you know, the hard part is to have this as a set text, or have these books as set text that children will read through their school years. It'll be on a curriculum. That is a battle ahead, I think. So, but that is my hope.
Thank you, Alex. And for you, Benjamin, what's your hope for Windrush Child?
Do you remember when you opened the first page and you saw the dedication? I don't know if you remember it. It was that I hope my sister reads this book because she's never read a book. Right. I got a twin sister who just doesn't read. And I said, I want her to read this book. I think because, you know, she knows Jamaica, she may connect with it. The same as Alex, really. I mean, I want it to I want young people and adults to read it. I mean, that's really an obvious thing to say. But I want it to be a part of the kind of cultural discussion that we're having, if you like. At the end of the day, there's no nice way of saying this, but I've got to say it, I think. Eventually, I want it to lead to revolution. But I don't know, that may be wishful thinking.
Well, that feels like that call to arms, Benjamin, feels like the perfect way to end our session. I am absolutely delighted that I've had this wonderful hour with you, and I can't recommend these two books enough. I've read them twice in preparation for coming here, but I think I'm desperate to read them again, actually, and to read them to my children. And I think especially the Voices series that the Windrush Child is part of is just such an incredible project to bring these stories that languished in the footnotes into the center of our history and of our knowing. And huge respect to the two of you, and thank you so much, and thank you to Fane and the organisers for bringing this together today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.